Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. If you watch the news, they are always telling us how we're a divided nation and we can't get along with each other. Well, we might be divided, but in my walk through life, I find that most of us who have different opinions actually get along great. And today's guests are a perfect example of that. They are two members of the Newport City Council, John Wilson and Julie Raboin. And if I get this right, you are a staunch conservative and you're a staunch liberal.
You got it.
Yeah.
Quite right, Scott.
Quite right backwards.
Just flip it.
On opposite day.
Now, on the serious side is, do you agree that if you watch the media, you would swear that we're at each other's throats all the time?
Yeah, on the federal level especially,
Yeah.
but I guess state level too. We don't see much in the news, well, aside from local newspapers about municipalities, but absolutely, I think you're spot on, Scott.
And if you watch the news, John, are you supposed, in all seriousness, you are more on the conservative side and you're more on the liberal side. The news would probably have you believe that you could not sit in this room without bad-mouthing her.
They would. But for the council, and I've told, I learned this when I first got on the council from Mr. Barra, and he was definitely liberal, that for the city of Newport, there is no politics. We're on the council for one purpose, obviously to serve the people, but more importantly, what is best for Newport. And as new members have come on, and I believe Julie and James Merriam, I told them the same thing. There are no politics on the council. It's what is best for Newport.
Right. And do you actually like her?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you like John?
Absolutely.
And I wish that because it really is a pet peeve of mine, is I believe there's so many good people in this world, and most of us get along, but you don't see that. You don't see that enough in the news. So I wanted the two of you on because I know both of you, and I know both of where you stand, and I just say, like, both of you remember the show The Odd Couple, and you know
Well,
how
I'm a
these,
little young for that, but yes, I've seen reruns.
right, and you're kind of like The Odd Couple. All right, John, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, you've already said that,
But no, you're
fairly conservative.
where were you born? What did you do with your life?
real fast, I was born in Sherbrooke, Quebec. Lived in Canada for 18 years.
Yeah.
And then I got a job with Butterfields, which was a factory that overlapped the border. And some of the Canadians got to go to the apprentice course in Massachusetts. Usually you'd have a class of 8, it'd be 2 Canadians and 6 Americans. And so I was one of the ones that was selected to go from Canada down to Mass, with the expectation upon graduation that we would return. I'd be on the Canadian side and whoever went with me on the American side. But the draft came about real heavy. We had a choice at that time when we all got our draft notices that those that were on the green card to be allowed to work in the United States, that you can turn your green card and go back to Canada, or you're going to be drafted. I'm the only one, I think, of about 8 or 10 Canadians. They all went back north. And I said, no, I like it down here. So I went ahead and got my draft notice, and that's a story unto itself, where I put it back in the box, figuring if it's not deliverable in 48 hours, it said return to sender. But 72 hours later, still in my box. I got drafted and went into service, got out after 2 years. I was rewarded with a trip to Vietnam. Then after 2 years of coming back to Butterfields and working on the American side in the engineering department, I said, well, the pay was good, but this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life, sitting here designing cutting tools. So I went back into the service and then ran it for 28 years. And about my 12th year in, I was kind of coerced that it would be wise to take out U.S. citizenship. So when I did, I took it out for myself and my daughter that was born in Germany.
Right. And while you were in Vietnam, you were a, squad leader?
I started off as a regular rifleman, and you either progress one of two ways, either time in service, or if those above you get shot and they're gone, you get promoted up that way. So I was a squad leader in Vietnam, yes.
And by the time you retired as sergeant major, how many people answered to you?
Well, I worked, my final assignment, I worked for a 3-star general.
Right.
And basically I was kind of his advisor.
Right.
And we're in charge of everything west of the Mississippi River. Just prior to that, I was in a unit where we were closing down a training battalion, and I had about, with trainees, a little over 2,000 soldiers working under me.
Right.
But most of the time it was 100 to 300 actual soldiers that I was in charge of.
And I heard, though, that your wife always outranked you. That when you got home, even though she weren't in the military, she always outranked you. Is that true?
That is very wise to say yes.
Yes. So,
I could roughshod the troop, but not my wife. I didn't even attempt to.
So, Julie, we also go quite a bit back through politics and through everything, and it's been always interesting. And I believe for a time, didn't your family live up on the same road that I live?
On Pine Hill?
On Pine Hill, but
Yes,
that was way
indeed.
before I moved up there. So, who is Julie Raboin?
Well, my grandparents, both sets, were from Quebec, and they were French Canadians, unlike Mr. Wilson's family.
You were English Canadian?
Most, yes.
Okay.
So I'm the youngest of 5 children. My parents were dairy farmers, and so I grew up on a dairy farm, learned how to work really, really hard. After high school, I went to North Country. I graduated in 1989, and I wasn't ready to go to college, so I moved to Florida for a year. I ended up getting married quite young, had 3 children, lived in Burlington for a number of years, Colorado Springs for a couple of years, and then in 1999, moved back to Newport with my young family. Not too long after, I ended up being a single parent and was able to go to college, was supported by public assistance during those years, which is something that I never expected to do and gave me a whole world of experience in a subject that I never really wanted to study. And then I graduated with a bachelor's degree in 2005 and was able to get a really nice job, which is where we met when I was the regional coordinator of Building Bright Futures, working on early childhood systems.
I've often thought, though, you're new to the board. Is it different now being on, as, you always went to the meetings and you always went to, like, legislative stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find, though, it's a bit different when you're on the board than when you're sitting there?
Yes and no. I've done a lot of advocacy over the years. I've been very involved in partisan politics on the side. Being on the other side of the table, it's somewhat different. You feel a lot more responsible for making good decisions. You can't stick to your own agenda as far as, when I was advocating for early childhood systems, that's like very specific. Now I'm advocating for substance abuse prevention, which is very specific. But when you're representing the whole public and I'm not elected, so far I'm appointed, you have to keep everybody in mind. And like Mr. Wilson said, you have to do what's best for the city and certainly not have your own personal agenda.
And the other thing is, from myself having served in legislature, is sometimes you go into these things and you have a you have great ideas, but you realize, wait, in the grand scheme of things, that won't work, or there isn't the money, or you have to allocate. It's so much more complex. That's how come I actually have tremendous respect for anybody who serves, as long as they take their job seriously. Because there are people who serve who don't take their job seriously. But I still believe that most people go into, whether it's city council, town boards, or state. I won't go as high as national. I don't think all those people. I don't think a lot of those people are there for the right reason. But I do believe in the state of Vermont we have a lot of good people who are serving, who sometimes I don't agree with. So the two of you then is, when you heard Julie was coming onto the board and you knew where she stood, she's been very public figure. Did you think, okay, what did you think, John? Because from what we understand, you are the longest serving member of the council.
Yes.
Has that been confirmed? Because
I don't know if it's been confirmed.
because you are old.
Yeah, I am. I'm a young 72 years old now. We had the candidates, and when you get the slate, I mean, you already have these ideas in your mind. Well, this one, that one. But we conducted the interviews, and Julie was so far ahead of the others with her answers that after the entire process was done, there may have been a little bit of resistance, at which time I said, well, then why are we interviewing people? She out-interviewed everybody. And they came around to my way of thinking. I mean, you're either going to interview, you'd be a hypocrite if I interviewed you knowing I'm not even going to consider you because I don't like your stands. And if you come out the best, then I would advocate for you. So that was just the way it was. After the election and the interviews, and then we made our choices, I mean, seriously, the phone was ringing off the hook at my house. Calls like, boy, you really blew that selection. I says, well, how did we blow it? Well, you put a woman on the board, she's liberal, and then you blew the other one because you put a minister on, and there's a separation of church and state. And at that particular time, I told this individual, you need to get a life. I mean,
The Mr. Mayor he isn't there as a minister.
No, he's
being
not.
a minister is part of his life.
Yes, yeah. And when he came on board, I also reminded him that, and it's kind of tough because he is my minister, just sitting there like I'm talking to a little child and saying, look, these are some of the rules, and don't bring any of the church stuff into it, So, yeah, but we conducted the interviews, and when I first came on board, I was met with the good old boy syndrome. And I kind of bucked the whole system because nobody even knew who I was. And I interviewed, and I guess I had done well too, because I was appointed for 3 months, and then I had to run for my seat. And now I've run 17 years, I think it is. But yeah, at the start, when anybody comes in, we have these preconceived ideas, but hey.
And you've probably seen people, and maybe even yourself, people come onto the board, and they're all full of it, as in they're all energetic. They're going to do this, they're going to do that, and then all of a sudden the reality is sometimes of serving is like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
You mean that's part of the job? Because there is a lot more to any service than meets the eye. And you guys, I know both of you went into this for the big bucks, right?
Yeah.
Now, how much is a council member paid a year?
The council member gets $1,500. The council president gets $1,750, and the mayor gets $2,000.
So if you guys had to sit right here and do math in your head, how much does that break down in an hour? Do you think you end up with 25 cents?
Probably not, because we get paid for 25 meetings a year. But during the budget process, yeah, we get paid for 2 meetings of the month, but we usually meet every week. So, yeah.
So Julie, when you went before the committee for your, or the council for consideration, what did you think? Did you think you were gonna walk out of this with, smelling like a rose and get in a position?
I was fairly confident that I would be appointed. I didn't see how they could not appoint me because I've been so involved in city government for so many years. I mean, I've been attending council meetings either as part of a job or just because I'm interested and civically engaged. So
But politics does but people in politics can do funny things. You got to admit that.
Absolutely, and there certainly was some doubt in my mind that there's, I think I have a long-standing history of having a up and down relationship with the mayor, and I didn't expect that he would support me, which is okay. But I would have been surprised if I wasn't appointed, and I would have felt that was unfair, but I would have understood.
Yeah. And in reality, it is good, to have a woman on the board and different age groups too, because you do have a tendency to maybe see things a little differently, and right now you have a pretty diverse board, don't you?
Yes, I think right now it's a good, diverse, but working well board.
Right. And had you already formed an opinion about John before you served, or?
Absolutely, yes.
Did you already like him? Or
Yes.
did you not like him?
I mostly liked Mr. Wilson. I have a lot of respect for Mr. Wilson. In fact, I can't even call him John. He's Mr. Wilson to me and always will be. For a number of years, Mr. Wilson and I have been attending some of the same meetings. There's one particular community commons meeting that is nonpartisan. It's not sponsored by the city. It's a forum for citizens to be engaged and just talk about things in an open forum. And Mr. Wilson has been attending that since its inception. And, I would see Mr. Wilson sitting back and listening and listening and listening. And I would often see his mind change about things. And I was like, he is actually considerate and thoughtful and willing to change his opinion after listening to both sides of a story. And I have deep respect for that, where he's not stuck to his own dogged belief system. He will consider other opinions, and that made me respect and like Mr. Wilson very much.
You know what's sad though about that change in your opinion? They call that flip-flopping. Well, if you're flip-flopping for political expediency or for gain, that's not the same. But I think it's great to be able to get in mid-disagreement or whatever and say, wow, that's a good point. Had you formed an opinion, John, about Julie before she came on the board?
I felt that I really knew how she stood on a lot of subjects. Like I said, about 3 years at Community Commons, and not pat myself, I think I'm about, the mayor used to go, but I went to just about every meeting. There would be meetings where 17 women and me sitting there, and I'm be sitting there thinking, I shouldn't be here right now. But I always believed that if you listen to people, maybe 90% I didn't agree with, but an idea would come up, oh, this is not really a bad idea. So, yes, I think over a period of time, I've changed my opinions on things. I could probably say over the years that I have voted on things that years later I think, geez, maybe I should have rethought that a little bit more. Right. But, yeah, I've changed. But did I have preconceived ideas? No, I thought from sitting through meetings and listening to Julie, I knew what she stood for, and I think she knows what I stand for. But knock it off. There's got to be a common ground where I got to give a little and she's got to give a little. And I can't remember the issue, but one night we were getting ready to vote on one thing, and Julie had talked about her side, well, not sides, but how she felt. And then when we got ready for a vote, I remember looking over and said, now, remember, what is best for Newport? And she voted with what was proposed. And I'm thinking, all right, she's coming around. No, serious. And I've had my mind changed a few times. And that's why I think public comments are important. I know there was a period on the council when it was attempted to stifle and eliminate public comment. No, you can't do that. We work for the public, they have their say. But the one thing and I'm kind of proud of what I did, was it always used to be at the end of the meeting, public comments,
Right.
and then new and old business. Well, if you have an issue with the city because a snowplow was just torn your mailbox out and ripped your lawn up, and yes, you want to come to the council and vent your frustration, you shouldn't have to sit there for a couple hours waiting to say it. So, got the mayor to bring the upfront public comments. That way, yes, as issues go on, you may still want to have input. But right at the start, I didn't think, I'd watch people sitting there and I knew what their problem was, and they'd have to sit there for 2 hours. I'm thinking, let them get it off their chest, say what they have to say, and then they can go about their business. So
Okay. Now we were going to be talking about your differences, and then you talk about your mind changing. When I first got to know you, John, anytime I called you, you used to have to pick up one of those old crank telephones. Little bit of exaggeration. You've actually evolved in the world of technology. You used to tell me, no cell phones, no, and the only phone is meant to be connected to the wall. Yes. You still have one of those, right?
yes, I do.
But you do now. You've evolved. You now have an answering machine.
Yes.
And I heard you're even on the internet.
Yes. And to show how modern I'm getting, I've received a call from Scott yesterday about this program, and he comes back with his normal, old ideas. And when I called him back, I said, well, the carrier pigeon that I sent out should have already given you my response. But yeah, I can make this program. But,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, Julie, do you still have a crank phone in your house, or are you
it's not a crank
are you
phone.
one of these technological people?
I am very up to date with technology. I think it's really important to be efficient and live in the modern world, at least for somebody my age. If I was Mr. Wilson's age, I think I would be a little resistant to getting on the internet or having a cell phone. But for me, in the work I do, it's really important to
I
be
know when I
up to date.
contact you, you're typically like bang right back to me. And with John, he looks out, and because I'll be out there, I'll have the smoke signals go on. In all seriousness, though, John is very prompt
Absolutely,
at
yeah.
getting back to me. It's just something that I like to razz him because I complain about not being able to find my phone, and he said if it's connected to the wall like mine, you won't lose it. What else? How else do you feel you're different than
Well,
John and?
I think despite our differences, we have a lot of similarities. And one thing that I notice a lot is that we both stand for consistency and policy and systems. If we're going to have a new policy, say a parade policy, or somebody wants to have an event, if we're going to implement a policy, that policy needs to be applied to everybody. And it can't be, this one gets this kind of treatment, that one gets that kind of treatment. And I think we both think through the effects of anything, any idea that comes before the council. Well, if it's this kind of thing, what'll that do to veterans? Where I'm thinking, well, that same thing, how's that going to affect, say, the early childhood parade? So we're looking at very different sectors, I think, but we think in the same way about the cause and effect. and making sure that things are fair and just.
And you're both very big champions of transparency.
Yes.
You know, why don't you speak on that, or both of you?
Go ahead.
Well, I think the only way to have the trust of a community is to be transparent. The community needs to have the faith that the business is being done in public as it's supposed to be. We have open meeting laws for a reason, and if the public suspects that we are bending the rules, they're not going to put their faith in us. And I think that in order for your average person to want to vote and to be at all involved in the operations of their community, they need to feel like they have a voice, that if they come to a meeting, they're going to be heard and respected, that they have the opportunity to give their input. And I think it's a top requirement of a public servant to make sure that they are actually serving the people. I hear quite regularly at city council meetings that this meeting is for the council to do their business, it's not for the public, we're elected to represent. And it gives me the impression that not everybody is invested in listening. I mean, I understand representing, but how do we represent the people if we don't listen to them?
And the media, you know, love them or hate them, because the national media, I'm really disappointed with. But the local media, maybe it's because I got my start at the Chronicle for years. I think most of the media are pretty decent. They try. Some do better than others at getting it right. But it's also part of their role to let people know what's going on, and occasionally question executive sessions.
Definitely.
And I remember occasionally running into that issue myself. And I remember one time I questioned, I said, well, why are you going to executive session? This was in another community. Well, I could tell they wanted to do something that they weren't supposed to be doing. They said, to talk about the water cooler, the employee water cooler. Yes, that's underneath employee benefits. And I said, no. and they then chuckled and went, because I think for the most part, most stuff, you know, I'm sure both of you will agree, there is stuff that has to be done behind closed doors. But I think for the most part, I think keeping things open is good.
But I'd like to add, when you're talking transparency, yes, we're elected by the public to take care of them, represent them. We've had, over the 17 years I've been on, we've had a couple issues where I would dig my heels and say, no, I think we ought to put this to a public vote at, say, town meeting. Or, well, no, you're elected, you can make the decision. I say, yeah, but this is a decision I think the public should be involved in. And luckily, I've got my way quite often, because I will just dig in a little bit. And I believe in transparency. I have nothing to hide. I got nothing to gain from being on the council.
So neither one of you are colluding with the Russians, then.
No,
Is that safe to
I
say?
think that's safe to say.
I've gone through 3 of Jim Condos's, our Secretary of State's, transparency meetings. And the last one was the first one where they admitted, and he told us, and we had 2 state reps there, that yes, we follow the state transparency laws, but what is frustrating is the legislature exempted themselves from the transparency. And he looked right at 2 of our area representatives, and they both shook their heads. And then at that time, Jim Kondo says, it's wrong. We know it's wrong.
Right.
But we still have to adhere to the transparency laws, but our own legislature doesn't.
Okay, I have a question of both of you. John, do you ever, when she says something, do you ever shake your head and say, I'm not so sure about that? Even though you respect her, do you ever think, yeah?
Oh, yes. I mean, we don't have to agree.
Right.
And I'm sure she sat through stuff when I'm talking, like, I
Do you
don't agree
do you
with
ever
it.
ask yourself what planet he's from when he says something?
Maybe on occasion, but for the most part, I understand that we have very different perspectives and
Yeah.
experiences in life, and I can think through, well, if I were Mr. Wilson, I might feel that same way. And I think the balance, making sure that we have a variety of experiences and people on a board is the key.
You know what I think? I think one thing, I'm going to put words in your guys' mouths, and you might tell me, no, I'm wrong. I think the one thing you both respect about each other is you might not agree with each other, but you know where each other is coming from. And you, like, I know both of you, and I don't, and we haven't even always agreed, and John knows, believe it or not, John probably you view me as this right-wing extremist. He views me as this left-wing nut in most cases. So the thing is, but you know where each other are coming from, and do you respect each other's decision-making process?
Yes, I do, because I'm even though I don't always agree, I'll say one thing about Julie. She comes to the meetings prepared. I've seen this through the legislative breakfasts. I have opinions, but normally I just kept them to myself, and then I talk to people offline. Julie's a little bit different. She'll go right up front and speak. But even over the years, maybe the last 7 or 8 years, I don't always agree with her, but I've never seen her ever come not prepared to ask a question, and she has her facts together.
Your thoughts, Julie?
I think institutional knowledge is awesome. So when somebody has 17 years of experience in a position, they bring a perspective that nobody else has.
Right.
They've seen things come and go. They've seen the history repeat itself, and I respect that knowledge, whether or not I agree with the decisions that person has made over those years. I see Mr. Wilson strongly consider opinions, as I said earlier, listen and consider, and he's very thoughtful. And how can you question that? There's no better way to behave and make decisions. And as Mr. Wilson said, we don't always agree. Sometimes I'll make a motion and nobody will second it, and that's okay. You know, we do know where each other stands, and that's trustworthy and transparent.
So before we go on to a slightly different topic, do you serve with pretty decent? Because you're not the only two who serve on the board. Do
No.
you think you serve with some pretty decent people?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I can't always have said that in the past, but yes, I think we have a real good board right now, and we're all different, but I think we all have Newport's best interest in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just to change the direction a little bit, because this is Newport's 100th year. This is the 100th year since Newport became a city.
Mm-hmm.
How's planning's going for the big festivities? I guess you were telling me before that that's more underneath you've been going to those meetings.
Yes, I've attended, I think, about a year and a half now. We were having monthly meetings, and we have a good group of interested people in Newport, all from different backgrounds. And now, as we're getting closer, it's like every 2 weeks we're having a meeting. We've been talking. I know what's going on for the centennial right now, I believe. It started with people throwing out ideas, and now we're coming to fruition on quite a few of them. Like Steve Edgerly, he volunteered to run the parade. That's a massive undertaking.
Oh, it is. It's a lot more than what most people think.
And when we have our parade on the 30th, I think that's the Saturday of
30th
June.
of what, June?
I think it's 30 June to 3 July. So Newport is having their centennial celebrations. It's not going to be, and I'm not knocking it, but it's not going to be like the Derby Parade where we have 50 harvester tractors. This is basically we're looking more for floats. And at last call, I think it was 7 or 8 have volunteered for floats. For the bands, I believe we have 6 or 7 bands that are going to be in the parade. And they're not just local. I mean, we just got an approval from the Fife and Drum Band out of Burlington. Of course, we're having to help pay for some of this because they're not coming for free. I got I assisted Mr. Johnson with names and people to talk to, and the 40th Army Band, National Guard Band out of Vermont, is going to be here. And then afterwards, they're going to conduct a concert, for playing music. We've got, that's the parade part. The last 2 meetings, we have a 95% confirmation we're going to have a flyover, probably the F-16s coming out of Burlington to start the parade off. We were going to have Mr. Pomerleau, Tony Pomerleau, as the Grand Marshal, and he really was hoping to be it, but unfortunately he passed away.
And the big man upstairs had different plans.
So right now we're in that process of who the Grand Marshal will be. We've invited the mayors of Quaticook, Magog, and Stansted to participate in our parade because they're local towns in the area. We've got stuff going on with the airport. We're going to have a Civil War reenactment. They're going to come in for like 2 days and take over Prouty Beach and have their demonstrations out on the water. We have a myriad of activities for the kids for the parade. There's going to be a street dance. Catamount Arts out of St. Johnsbury has offered up their stage, so we're going to use that. And we have, not part of the centennial, but the Wednesdays on the waterfront. We just supported them for another year of concerts in the summer, which brings a lot of people into the area. And we're going to use St. Johnsbury's grandstand or bandstand. And so we're going to have to get ours fixed so we don't have to rely on a better conditioned stand.
Here's a thought, John and Julie, is, well, especially John, since you're on the committee, is I have photos that'll be in my 100th birthday book of the city, is the Norwich cadets used to have a summer encampment over at, I have photos of the, I don't know if you've seen them because John isn't online on Facebook, but I've posted them. The Norwich cadets used to hold the summer, and I think this was pre-World War II. They had I have photos of their horses out there and their tents. So, that's Norwich cadets might be, you could actually reenact some of the scenes that I have in that I have in those photos. Just an idea.
Yeah. Also going on, we have, we're going to be stamps, or people that collect envelopes and first day editions. The post office will be stamping 2 envelopes that has the city logo and the Lady of the Lake. They're going to do that. We have the 100th anniversary coin that people can purchase at the city clerk's office right now. We have the bronze and then the silver, and then you can buy the set in a nice fancy case. We're going to have glasses with a city emblem put on it. We're doing a book, as you are, but the Newport Daily Express has come on board now, and we're in negotiation with them for they to print the book and all this, which is a sizable savings for us. So yeah, but the actual centennial is that's going to be our summer festivities. But on the 5th of March, our next council meeting will be at the Gateway. And it's normally an informational briefing for the vote the next day, of which normally you get 4 or 5 people will show up for the meeting. But we're hoping for a large turnout because as soon as the meeting is over, they're setting up displays. I believe we now have maybe a Tiffany chandelier that was on the actual Lady of the Lake on display. We have maps. We have quite a few displays that are going to be put up at the gateway. And then we're going to have the 100th anniversary cake. And then it's going to be culminate with fireworks on the 5th of March, which is the actual, I believe, the 100th anniversary.
So, I'll tell you guys, if you really want to liven it up, part of the history of the community was Newport used to be a big rum running, during Prohibition. So what you ought to do is you ought to have a contest on who can get across the border without reporting. And the ones who manage to do it win. The other ones will probably end up in jail. I don't think that's a good idea.
I would like to say we don't want to do that anymore because I have a lot of good friends that work for the Border Patrol. But one other thing for the Centennial, I don't want to, this used to be a railroad town.
Yep, it is.
And Mr. Johnson has worked hard, and we have an approval from the railroad for an engine and 2 cars, and on the Sunday, which I'm not sure if it's the first or the second, but the Sunday, which will probably be the first, there'll be train rides from Newport to Orleans and then back. And I've talked to some people, and they said, well, I've never been on a train, so we're going to get tickets for the family.
I think that's great.
And yes, there is a cost, but we're also working with some of the local banks to offset. So instead of having to charge $11 a person, maybe we can get it down to 5 or 6. We're working that issue right now. So there's going to be a lot of good things going on. But I would like to say that a lot of this came about where the council itself over the 2 fiscal years has set aside so far $50,000, but the Pomerleaus came on board with a check for $86,000, which helped to really bring this up to a super celebration.
Here's a little trivia for both of you. I bet you John knows this. Maybe you don't, John. One of your committee members, I believe Roger Carty, is on the committee. Of course, he has the Richardson collection, but besides that, did you know, because his father played a role in one of the most unrecorded parts of Newport's history. Do you know what that was, Julie?
I don't.
Do you, John?
No.
His father was Hub Parker, as in that was his boxing name. Newport was a great boxing community. The people loved to brawl, but they had boxing matches. They had at the municipal building. And Roger's a big man, tall man. His father, was a well-known boxer, Hub Parker. But then you had Tubby Mirandola. He fought at the Boston Gardens. This used to be a great boxing community. So Roger brings to your board many facets. Yeah, he has the photos, but then he has that connection to one of the most unwritten about parts of Newport's history, and the famed Hub Parker. There, tell him that. Tell him you knew his father.
And Roger Carty has made most of the meetings, and his support, and with the Rotary coming on board and supporting, and their portion, yes. We've got with the local churches, and there'll be at least one chicken pie supper, and then I believe one of the churches is going to have a barbecue during this time frame. And the Newport City Fire Department on, I believe it's a Sunday morning, will be providing a community breakfast. So and you don't want to just mention 1 or 2 people because there's so many people that are offering so much of their time. It's awesome.
Okay, Julie, now what do you, I know you're not intricately involved with that aspect. What have you been involved with?
Well, despite having been in attendance at city council meetings for years and being pretty well informed, there's still a lot to learn when you join a city council. And I have prioritized things like attending planning commission meetings. I think it's really important to know about zoning, and they have been working on revising the zoning bylaws. And before that, they had done some work on the municipal plan, the city plan. And I wish I could do everything, but it's impossible. And especially, I think one of the barriers for younger people to serve on boards and commissions and councils is that we have full-time jobs, and many
Same
of us
thing
have.
at the State House, too.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's very difficult for people who are in the working part of their lives and who have families to be able to dedicate that kind of time. So I do what I can, and I make sure, as Mr. Wilson said, I come to meetings prepared, and that might mean focusing on one particular issue at a time.
And let me throw this out, Scott, because coming on the board, as did James Merriam, we happened to have a reappraisal come on board. And Julie and James didn't realize that the council and the justices of the peace, of which Julie is the justice of the peace, we do the tax appeals. And we started in September, doing 5 a week, and we ended up in February, 95 appeals. So, yes, and Julie's made just about every one. And understand the younger people work. That's why I can go to all kinds of meetings. I'm retired now. But when I wasn't retired, and I was working at Ethan Allen at the time, yeah, there was many things I couldn't go to because I had a job. So there is a benefit for having someone that is out of the working age now, and he can attend these meetings. But I don't hide anything in secret. If I see James, I'll tell him, and I let Mr. Chanette know, because he has a job. So it's easy for me to float around and go to all these meetings. But whenever I see people, I like to let them know what's going on, because there's no secrets.
And the Board of Civil Authority, that has been very time-consuming over the past few months. Every Thursday night, plus having 2 or 3 inspections a week.
Yeah.
It's been such an awesome learning experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it's been very time-consuming.
And the best part for re-election is if we're re-elected, there's going to be another round starting in April.
So I know we weren't on here to talk about about the election, but you both are up for re-election. For some reason, even if you two are not re-elected, I suspect that knowing you, Julie, and knowing you, John, if you lose, you're not going to disappear into the woodwork. Do you think you would, Julie? Do you think you're just going to disappear?
No, I am so committed to civic engagement, whether I am on the council or advocating for certain issues. I will be in that council room most of the time, and advocating for community involvement and civic engagement. I think it's really important to a flourishing community for everybody to be involved, and I want to lead by example.
What about you, John? Are you going to disappear and go to Florida?
No. As you know, not only the council stuff, but I'm kind of heavily involved in veterans affairs. I bring veterans to the schools. My daughter does the letter writing campaign. I speak at.
How often do I call you up? Hey, John, I need a veteran to talk, and happens quite. And how often do you say no?
I don't think I said no.
No.
But in the past, and Scott had one. It was World War II, myself in Vietnam, and an Afghanistan guy, the 3 different generations. And as we continue on, and I've supported Scott in those issues, pretty quick I'm going to be the old guy, the oldest guy in the group, and then as we go down the tubes, because I hate to say our World War tours are becoming very sparse.
I've recorded many of them. And by the way, your technology, John was on the show with a group of we had World War II, as you were saying, World War II,
Vietnam, myself.
Vietnam, and the current generation of, and he said that cell phones out in the bush, out in the jungles of Vietnam, he said it just would not have worked to get us to have your cell phone ring as the enemy is going by. You said just would not have worked.
No. that was Dana LaPlante from there.
Yeah,
And-
because Dana was saying when he was in one of the war zones that you could take a cell phone right from,
Yeah.
you could be in a combat area and take a cell phone.
And I always liked the fact that Lindy Palin said that, they'd get real snail mail during World War II. In Vietnam, it was all letters. I got, my wife would write letters every day, I think. But we'd only get them whenever we came back to the rear. And then Dana's sitting there thinking that, we Skype back and forth. And yes, that's good technology, but I always said that it's bad in another way. If you would have a disagreement with your spouse, or she's told you the kids are having problems in school, if you're going out on a mission and are you thinking about the mission, or are you thinking about what's happening back home? It could really
And
get you in some hot water.
Dana's wife could not Skype him Kool-Aid like your wife
Yeah,
used.
yeah.
His wife used to send him packets of Kool-Aid for when he was out in the bush to cover up the taste of the iodine
Yeah, in the
tablets.
water, yeah.
So,
So
okay.
that's a point that I never would have thought of, how having technology in the field could distract you.
Well, yeah, and that's why, and the youth, and I'm come to say the older generation now, there's a lot we don't know about each other even now.
Right. And so
But
you both brought
you never got my carrier pigeon I sent out to you never landed, did it?
Yeah, that's the other thing. John,
Hate
because
it.
he doesn't like technology, he does use carrier pigeons. Kind of a joke between us. But it sounds like we are proving the national media wrong, that you can sit in a room, not agree with each other, but actually still like each other.
Like and respect. And even if we didn't like each other, I think we would still respect each other.
Okay, well, thank you for coming on the show, and good
It's
luck
my
with
pleasure.
your next election. And no matter what, I know I'll be seeing you around.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.